What is this? Oh, that is so nice. Wow, that's so cool. Where did you get it? Wait. Is this ethical? Should we be shopping in high street shops? Who made these clothes? What are their working conditions like? Do they work in decent factories? Are they paid a living wage? Can they even take bathroom breaks? And what country do they work in? Can they join trade unions? Are we contributing to these workers' oppression? Are we blameworthy? Luckily, I'm a political philosopher, so I can help answer these questions. So why do we participate in these practices? Well, we all have to participate in clothing culture to some extent. In our society, we have to look good to be respected, and looking good means different things in different circumstances, like giving a presentation, at work, at the gym, going on a date. There are social norms around clothing, and it's difficult to avoid participation. And these pressures will be experienced differently by different social groups, depending on things like gender, race, age, occupation, etc. And it's not our actions as individuals that are causing sweatshop labour. It's only when our actions combine with the actions of millions of other people that there is a problem. So we are constrained by social norms, and the problem is the accumulation of millions of people's actions, not individual actions. This is what philosophers call structural injustice. Normally, when we think about injustice, we think of things like an unjust war, genocide, or human rights violations. In these cases, there is one individual or organization that we can point to and say it is their fault. But structural injustice is different. In cases of structural injustice, everyone is constrained by the structures. It's difficult for us to avoid participation. And the problem is the accumulation of actions, not individual actions. So, can individuals be blamed for a structural injustice like sweatshop labour? Say Aoife hit Chiara. Don't worry, she didn't really hit her. But if Aoife did hit Chiara, then we would say that she was blameworthy. This is because Aoife intended to hit Chiara. She hit Chiara with her hand, and she knew it would cause pain, so she knew what the consequences of her actions would be. This is how philosophers have normally thought about moral responsibility or blameworthiness. A person is blameworthy when they do something wrong. They intend to cause harm, they directly cause harm, and they know the consequences of their actions. Does this apply in the case of sweatshop labour? Well, here's a sweatshop supply chain. Supply chains in the global garment industry are extremely complex. So at one end of the chain, the material is produced. For example, cotton is picked and it's turned into fabric. Then the fabric goes to cut, make, trim factories, where it's turned into garments. Then an international buyer or agent will source the garments from those factories. Then the garments are distributed to the retailers. And finally, a consumer will buy the garments from the retailers. So when we think about whether the consumer is morally responsible for sweatshop labour, we find that's actually a really difficult case to make. So the consumer doesn't intend to cause harm. They just buy clothes. The consumer doesn't directly cause harm. That happens over here at the other end of the supply chain. Does the consumer know the consequences of their actions? Well, they know in some sense that sweatshop labour is probably happening over here, but they don't know what exactly the consequence of any of their purchases will be. So, for example, the money from this purchase could go towards paying people who work in the retail shops or paying for the shop's overheads. It could go towards paying a designer or an international buyer. We don't know what the consequences of any particular purchase will be. So, On a traditional theory of moral responsibility, the consumer is not morally responsible. Does this mean we're off the hook? No. The wonderful political theorist Iris Marion Young came up with a new theory of responsibility for structural injustice. She argued that everyone connected to structural injustice shares responsibility for it. Political responsibility, as Young calls it, is not backward-looking, where we look at individuals' actions for blame, but it's forward-looking. So we think about how we can change these structures in the future. Political responsibility is shared, not isolating. So we realize that we all share responsibility together for structural injustice. Political responsibility judges the background conditions. So again, instead of pointing the finger at individuals' actions, we look at the overall system and think about how it can be changed. And changing a system requires collective action. Now, this is a brilliant theory. It explains why we are responsible for a structural injustice like sweatshop labour, but not to blame for it. But there's one problem with this theory that I want to point out. Is it really the case that everyone connected to a structural injustice shares the same kind of responsibility for it? I don't think so. Who's really in charge here? Some actors in these global supply chains are extremely powerful. They're retailers. Why? They have the money and the power. Large multinational garment corporations could change sweatshop conditions if they wanted to, but they don't. How do we know this? Well, in 2013, after the Rana Plaza factory collapse, in which over 1,100 workers were killed, the industry adopted the Bangladesh Fire and Building Safety Accord. This was a legally binding agreement for 5 years, extended for a further 3 years, which changed fire and building safety across the industry in Bangladesh. Now the questions are, why did this only last for 8 years? Why did it only apply in Bangladesh and not other garment exporting countries? Why is there not an international legally binding agreement to improve fire and building safety across the whole industry? And why is there not an international legally binding agreement on wages and rights to join unions across this industry? These changes are well within the grasp of this industry, especially when we consider that just 20 corporations make 99% of the profits. I repeat, just 20 corporations in the global garment industry make 99% of the profits. This is what the Business of Fashion and McKinsey call the super winners in the industry. So the super winners could eliminate sweatshop conditions if they want to, but they don't. Instead, they act in all sorts of ways to maintain the status quo. They lobby, they set the industry standards themselves, they engage in all sorts of greenwashing corporate social responsibility initiatives where they make us believe they're ethical actors, and they constantly manipulate consumers into buying new clothes. So, global garment corporations are morally responsible for sweatshop labour, and it is our responsibility to push these corporations for change. We can do this by getting political. You can write to the companies you purchase your clothes from. You can join a campaigning organisation like the Clean Clothes campaign in Amsterdam. And you can get involved in direct action, which involves and supports the garment workers themselves. So, to conclude, powerful agents are morally responsible for structural injustice, and it is our political responsibility to push the powerful for change. If you're interested in these arguments, you can read more about it in my book, With Power Comes Responsibility, The Politics of Structural Injustice. Thank you to our brilliant Campus Friesland students. This is Jentel, Anna, Svenny, Aoife, and Chiara. I'm Dr. Maeve McKeown. Have a good night.